The moment you move on, you assume women react because they loved you too much. You tell yourself they're jealous, regretful, suddenly aware of your value now that you're gone. That's the story most men believe. But the truth is harder than that and far more empowering. What actually happens when you move on has very little to do with chasing you. It has everything to do with losing control over who you are. Before we go any further, subscribe to this channel. Not for me, for you, because what you're about to hear isn't comfortable. And when things get uncomfortable, people forget. They slip back into old habits. You need reminders like this. If you care about respect, clarity, and building a life that doesn't beg for approval, subscribe now. Let's get into it. Here's what it really means when women seem to go crazy after you move on. It means the story they were telling themselves about you just collapsed. Most men misunderstand this from the beginning. They think the goal is to make her miss them. They believe absence is a tactic, that if they disappear long enough, she'll come running back. Emotional, desperate, finally seeing their worth. That's the fantasy, that's the movie version. And it's a lie. The hard truth is this: when you move on for real, you stop participating in her emotional narrative, and losing control over that narrative is what creates the reaction. Let's slow this down. The reaction you see is not love awakening. Love doesn't panic when control disappears. Attachment does, ego does, identity does. When you were with her, you played a role. Maybe you were the one who gave attention. Maybe you were the emotional anchor. Maybe you were the safe option. The one who always responded, always explained himself, always tried harder when things felt uncertain. You were predictable, and predictability feels comfortable. Predictability creates leverage. Predictability allows someone to organize their emotions around your presence. When you move on, that predictability ends. And here's why that matters. People don't just fall in love with others, they fall in love with how those people make them feel about themselves. They fall in love with the role someone plays in their inner world. They fall in love with certainty, with knowing someone will stay in place. So when you truly move on, not disappearing for a few days, not going silent, hoping for a reaction, but actually detaching, something deeper happens. You stop validating her version of reality. You stop being an emotional reference point. You stop confirming the story that says, I can leave and he'll still be there. You stop explaining. You stop chasing. You stop trying to be understood. You stop trying to be chosen. And that's when the reaction begins. Not because she suddenly wants you back, but because something inside her just lost its stabilizer. That's called emotional disorientation. When you were there, even during conflict or distance, you were still part of her emotional ecosystem. You were a known variable. She could predict you, test boundaries, pull away and watch you lean in, doubt you and see you prove yourself again. That dynamic fed something. When you move on, you don't just remove attention, you remove access, and access is power. Here's the part most people never tell you. Many of the emotional reactions you see after you move on are not about how special you were. They're about the fact that you're no longer usable. Let that land. Usable doesn't mean malicious. It doesn't mean bad intent. It means functional. You played a role in her emotional regulation. You were part of how she stabilized herself emotionally. When that role disappears without warning, without negotiation, without closure, it creates inner chaos, because now she has to face something she was avoiding. Herself. She loses certainty. She loses validation. She loses leverage. She loses the option to come back whenever she wants. And people don't like losing options. That's why the reaction often looks irrational. One moment she's distant, cold, indifferent. The next she's curious, emotional, angry, nostalgic, reaching out just to check in, posting things meant to be seen, asking mutual friends about you. That's not love reawakening, that's control withdrawing. Here's the reframe you need to hear. When you move on the right way, you're not trying to trigger anything. You're not proving anything. You're not trying to win. You're reclaiming authorship over your own life. And that's what destabilizes people who were used to writing you into their script. Now let's talk about why this hits women in particular the way it does. This isn't about superiority, it's about emotional dynamics. Most women are deeply attuned to emotional continuity. They track patterns, they notice shifts, they build internal maps of how relationships function. When you were in her life, you fit into that map. When you move on, you don't just leave the map. You invalidate it. You show her that her read on you was incomplete, that you're not who she thought you were. And that's uncomfortable, Because if she misjudged you, what else did she misjudge? That question creates tension, and tension seeks resolution. Some people try to resolve it by pulling you back in. Not always romantically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through nostalgia, sometimes through drama. Any reaction feels better than no access. Silence, real silence, is the one thing that can't be negotiated. Presence feeds fantasy. Silence forces reality. And reality is this: you don't need her reaction to validate your decision. But most men never reach that point. Here's what it costs you when you misunderstand this dynamic. If you move on hoping for a reaction, you're still tied to her approval. If you stay half attached, watching her social media, analyzing her behavior, waiting for signs, you haven't moved on. You've just changed the angle of dependence. That keeps you weak, reactive, stuck in the same loop that made the relationship unstable in the first place. Because the core issue was never her behavior, it was your lack of grounded self-respect. Now let me describe the man who isn't shaken by any of this. This man doesn't announce his exit. He doesn't threaten to leave. He doesn't weaponize silence. He doesn't disappear to provoke longing. He decides quietly. He looks at his life and asks a difficult question. Is who I am in this relationship aligned with who I'm becoming? If the answer is no, he moves, not emotionally, practically. He fills his days with purpose, with work that challenges him, with training that humbles him, with goals that don't care about his relationship status. He stops negotiating his worth. He doesn't need long closure conversations. He doesn't need to be understood. He doesn't need to win the breakup. He respects himself enough to walk away without dragging the past behind him. And here's the key: when this man moves on, people feel it. Not because he's cold, but because he's complete. His boundaries are clear. His energy is calm. His direction is obvious. That kind of grounded presence exposes instability in others, not intentionally, but naturally. Now listen closely. The goal is not to make women go crazy. The goal is to become the kind of man whose absence is felt because his presence was real, not performative. There's a difference. If you were only valuable because you were available, your absence creates irritation. If you were valuable because you had standards, direction, and self-respect, your absence creates reflection. That reflection is what people mistake for obsession. Now here's what you do. Not as a tactic, but as a reset. You stop chasing explanations. You stop reopening closed doors. You stop replying out of guilt. You stop being emotionally on call. You redirect your attention to things that don't negotiate with your emotions. You build a routine that doesn't collapse when someone leaves. You separate your sense of worth from someone else's response. You let silence do the work, not because silence is powerful, but because you're no longer afraid of being alone with yourself. That's the shift. And here's what happens when you stay consistent with that shift. Your energy changes. You're no longer trying to prove anything. You're no longer trying to be seen. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You choose. That single change filters your entire life. Some people won't like it. Some will react. Some will reach out. Some will try to pull you back into old dynamics. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is alignment. And when you stay aligned, something unexpected happens. You stop needing the reaction. You stop analyzing behavior. You stop reading between the lines. You stop asking why. Because your life is moving forward without needing answers from the past. That is real power, not dominance, not manipulation, not control, self-direction. So if you're listening to this hoping to learn how to trigger an emotional response, you're missing the point. But if you're listening because you're tired of being reactive, tired of being emotionally pulled around, tired of tying your confidence to someone else's mood, then you're exactly where you need to be. This was never about women. This is about you becoming someone who doesn't disappear when he's alone. You are the answer you've been waiting for. And if you want more truth like this, no fluff, no fantasy, just clarity that sharpens you, subscribe now. This isn't a channel for everyone. It's for people who want to build something solid inside themselves and connect with others from strength, not need. Stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep moving forward.